We saved $120,000 for our dream home. But my parents begged for it during an emergency. 2 weeks later, I saw my sister's Instagram post. A luxury kitchen renovation, bought with our life savings. When I confronted them, their 3-word reply destroyed our family forever. You won't believe what happened. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. I always love knowing who's listening. My name is Sylvia Beer, 32 years old, and my world shifted on a Tuesday morning while I sat in my small, rented apartment clutching my phone until my knuckles turned white. My husband, Mark, and I had spent 5 grueling years sacrificing vacations, dinners out, and every small luxury to save exactly $20,000 for our dream home. We were days away from closing on a charming cottage with a wraparound porch when my mother called, her voice trembling with a frantic, desperate energy that pierced through my heart. She claimed their pipes had burst, flooding their entire basement, and the furnace had died simultaneously, leaving them without heat or a functional home during the brutal winter months. They were sobbing, terrified, and claiming they were facing total financial ruin if they could not cover the immediate repair costs. Without a single moment of hesitation, fueled by love and filial duty, we wired the entire sum, believing we were saving our parents from homelessness and despair. We were so proud of our ability to help, feeling like heroes for protecting the people who had raised us, never suspecting that our sacrifice was actually a carefully orchestrated trap designed to exploit our kindness. I remember the feeling of relief I had when the transfer went through, convinced that we had secured their safety, completely oblivious to the cold, calculated betrayal that was already unfolding behind our backs, ready to destroy everything we had built with such immense effort. As I stare at the screen now, the reality of my misplaced trust is like a freezing blade pressing against my throat, turning my previous sense of pride into a hollow, aching void. The silence in the room is deafening, heavy with the weight of $120,000 gone, and the devastating realization that the people I called family were merely actors in a play, where Mark and I were the only ones losing everything. 2 weeks bled into the calendar, each day filled with the anticipation of finding our new home, the dream still vibrant in my mind despite the temporary financial setback. Mark and I had tightened our belts even further, eating nothing but basic pasta and skipping coffee, laughing about our resilience and our shared future. Then the notification pinged on my phone, a notification that would eventually shatter my reality into a million unrepairable shards. I opened my Instagram app, expecting to see a mundane update from a friend, but instead, my eyes locked onto a picture posted by my younger sister, Chloe. It was a photograph of a brand new, ultra-modern kitchen featuring gleaming marble countertops, custom cabinets, and incredibly expensive gold fixtures that caught the light in a way that screamed excess and luxury. My breath caught in my chest, a cold sensation spreading through my limbs as I read the caption she had typed with such careless, arrogant glee. "Thanks, Mom and Dad. This renovation is everything I ever dreamed of." I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs, struggling to reconcile the image of a luxury kitchen with the desperate, sobbing pleas for basement repair money I had received only 14 days earlier. The contrast was so stark, so utterly nauseating that I felt bile rise in my throat. I refreshed the page multiple times, hoping, praying, that I was misinterpreting the image or that maybe, just maybe, it was an old photo being reposted for some unknown reason. But the timestamp was current. The location tag was their house, and the reality began to sink in with a crushing, suffocating force. Every penny of our hard-earned savings had not gone to fixing a broken home. It had gone directly into the vanity project of the sister, who had always been the golden child, while I was simply the convenient bank account. My fingers trembled uncontrollably as I navigated to my messages, the screen blurring slightly through a veil of hot, angry tears that I could no longer suppress. I took a sharp, jagged breath, trying to calm the storm raging inside my mind while I drafted the message that would eventually blow my entire family structure to pieces. I attached the screenshot of Chloe's kitchen, that gaudy, gold-accented monument to our stolen future, and sent it directly to my mother's private number, followed by a simple, piercing question. I asked how she could justify using our life savings to renovate a kitchen while Mark and I were working ourselves to the bone, hoping for a simple, honest explanation or even an apology for the misunderstanding. I waited, the minutes dragging by like hours, the silence of the digital void feeling louder than any scream I could have let out. Every tick of the clock felt like a judgment on my own foolishness for being so trusting, for believing that my parents would never intentionally hurt me or sabotage my husband's career for the sake of a sibling's whims. I paced the small, cramped living room, the walls feeling like they were slowly closing in on me, as I wondered if there was a logical reason for this. Deception, however unlikely that seemed. Perhaps the contractors had overcharged, or perhaps the inheritance had been misunderstood. But deep down, the cold, ugly truth had already taken root in my gut. I knew, with a terrifying clarity that left no room for doubt, that I had been played for a fool by the very people who were supposed to be my safest harbor in a storm, and the anger that replaced my sadness was now burning hot, focused, and ready to demand the reckoning that they so richly deserved. The notification sound broke the silence like a gunshot, making me jump and nearly drop my device onto the hardwood floor. My parents had finally replied. My heart hammered against my ribs, a chaotic drumbeat of anxiety and rage as I tapped the screen to reveal the 3 words they had sent. I expected an apology, a pathetic excuse, or even a desperate attempt to manipulate me back into silence. Instead, the message read, "Get over it." That was it. 3 simple, cold, and utterly dismissive words that effectively erased 32 years of history, love and loyalty. It was as if they were telling me that my life, my sacrifice, and my struggle were nothing more than a minor inconvenience to their grand plans for my sister. The words stung worse than any physical blow could have. A clinical detachment that revealed exactly where I stood in their hierarchy of affection. I sat there in the dim light of the evening, the screen glowing in my face, feeling the last remnants of my childhood innocence burning away. There was no room for negotiation, no chance for reconciliation, and no possibility of ever seeing those people the same way again. They had made their choice, prioritizing Chloe's aesthetic desires over their own daughter's stability and future. The betrayal wasn't just the money. It was the blatant, cruel indifference toward my hardship. My mother and father, the people who taught me about right and wrong, had just handed me a lesson in corruption that I would never forget. I felt a strange, chilling sense of calm descend upon me, replacing the frantic energy of the last few hours. The mask had slipped, the illusion of the happy, supportive family had been shattered. And now I knew exactly what kind of people I was dealing with. They wanted me to just get over it. But they had no idea what kind of storm they had just unleashed by pushing me past the breaking point. I showed the message to Mark, who had returned home from his late shift, his face pale and exhausted from his grueling job. As he read the words, I watched his expression shift from confusion to a deep, simmering fury that mirrored my own. He didn't ask me to reconsider or try to mediate the situation. He simply looked at me, his eyes filled with a fierce protective resolve, and asked what I wanted to do next. That moment of unity was exactly what I needed to firm up my crumbling resolve and turn my grief into action. We sat down at our small kitchen table, the very same one we had been planning to replace, and began to map out every single piece of evidence we had. I started by documenting the original bank transfers, the desperate voice notes my mother had left, and the glaringly obvious timestamp on my sister's social media post. We realized that if we couldn't get our money back through polite requests, we would have to pursue justice through every legal and social avenue available to us. This was no longer just about a kitchen renovation. It was about the fundamental violation of trust and the theft of our future. I felt a surge of strength I didn't know I possessed. A cold, hard determination to see this through to the very end. The victim mentality that had kept me obedient for so long was officially dead, replaced by the spirit of someone who refused to be trampled. We were going to make them regret the day they chose to lie to us, and we were going to ensure they understood that they had not just lost a daughter, but they had also awakened a force they were completely unprepared to handle. Every move we made from here on out would be calculated, strategic, and entirely focused on exposing their deception to the world, leaving them with no place left to hide their shameful, ugly secrets. The following morning felt different, the air heavy with a quiet intensity as I began to execute our plan for accountability and truth. I started by contacting my bank to formalize the record of the large transfer, providing them with all the documented communication where my parents explicitly cited an emergency repair as the reason for the request. I knew that proving financial fraud was a complex hurdle, but I was determined to leave no stone unturned in my search for justice. While I worked on the paperwork, Mark spent his time scrubbing our social media accounts, ensuring that we had copies of every interaction, every shared photo, and every public comment my sister had made regarding her new luxury home. We were building a case, not just for the law, but for the court of public opinion, where their reputation for being the perfect family would finally be dismantled. My parents had relied on my silence, betting on my ingrained desire to keep family matters private, but they had fundamentally misjudged my capacity for resilience. I realized then that my upbringing had taught me to hide conflict, to bury pain, and to act as if everything was perfectly fine even when my world was burning. That version of Sylvia was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that silence in the face of such flagrant abuse was merely complicity, and I was finished being a silent partner in their schemes. I reached out to a legal advisor to discuss the potential for a civil suit, wanting to know exactly how far our rights extended in a situation involving direct theft and blatant emotional manipulation. Every step forward felt like a tiny victory against the crushing weight of their betrayal, a reclamation of my own narrative after years of being cast in the role of the reliable, disposable daughter. Word of the betrayal began to trickle through our extended family network like a slow-moving poison, and I decided it was time to take control of the narrative. Before my parents could spin their own version of events, I spent hours crafting a message that was factual, unflinching, and entirely devoid of the emotional plea I would have relied on in the past. I didn't need to beg for pity. The evidence spoke for itself with a clarity that required no embellishment. I sent the proof to our aunts, cousins, and family friends who had always praised my parents for their generosity and their devotion to their children. Included was the screenshot of the emergency plea for the basement, followed by the image of the marble kitchen that had replaced our dream home. I watched as the responses began to flood back, a mix of shock, disbelief, and mounting anger as people realized the depth of the deception. My parents, who had spent decades curating a public image of moral superiority, were suddenly facing a reality where their actions were finally being scrutinized by the people they valued most. The power they had wielded over me was crumbling in real time, replaced by a wave of collective accountability that they could not simply ignore or talk their way out of. I felt a profound sense of empowerment as I watched their carefully constructed world begin to crack under the weight of the truth. It was no longer just about me against them. It was about the truth finally coming to light, stripping away the thin veneer of respectability that had allowed their corruption to fester for so long. Every person who saw the evidence was another witness to their moral failure, and I knew that the isolation they had intended for me was now being redirected back onto them as a consequence of their own greed. The backlash was swift and relentless, creating a whirlwind that my parents were clearly not equipped to handle, especially with their pride on the line. My phone buzzed incessantly with frantic calls from my mother, her voice oscillating between saccharine, manipulative pleas for forgiveness, and sharp, biting insults designed to make me feel small. She tried to frame my transparency as a betrayal of the family, attempting to gaslight me into believing that my airing of these grievances was the real crime here. I remained remarkably calm, my heart steady, as I listened to her unravel, observing the cracks in her composure as she realized that her usual tactics no longer held any power over me. I had detached myself from the desperate need for their validation that had once governed my every action, and it was liberating to see the panic in her tone. Mark was by my side, a constant pillar of strength, refusing to allow any of their threats to faze us. We had made the decision to block their numbers, effectively severing the primary line of communication that had been used to manipulate us for years. It felt like stepping out of a suffocating room and into the fresh, cold air of reality. They wanted to maintain their facade, but I was committed to the truth. And the truth is a weapon that they could not deflect. I realized that my resilience was not just about surviving the initial loss of our savings, but about reclaiming my identity from the grip of their influence. I was no longer the daughter who would sacrifice everything to keep the peace. I was a woman who stood for justice, and that transformation was beginning to manifest in ways I hadn't expected. The fear was finally gone, and the path ahead, while uncertain, felt entirely mine to navigate, free from the shadow of their endless, crushing expectations. As the dust began to settle, I found myself reflecting on the broader implications of what we had endured and the necessity of standing firm in our resolve. I realized that my silence in the past had only served to fuel their sense of entitlement, allowing them to believe that my labor and resources were fair game whenever their whims shifted. This was not merely about a stolen sum of money, but about the systemic corruption of values that had occurred within my own family dynamic. By standing up for ourselves, Mark and I were participating in a form of personal activism, refusing to let the cycle of abuse continue to define our future. I began to see my journey as a testament to the idea that one's worth is not defined by their ability to appease others, but by their courage to demand respect and honesty. The tragedy of the situation was undeniable. Losing the trust I had placed in my parents was a profound sorrow, but it was also the catalyst for a radical shift in my internal landscape. I felt stronger, more capable, and far more discerning than I had ever been. I started documenting our experience not to wallow in the bitterness of the past, but to provide a roadmap for others who might find themselves trapped in similar cycles of familial exploitation. I realized that by sharing our story, I was reclaiming the power that had been taken from me, transforming a painful memory into a lesson about boundaries and the strength required to maintain them. The house we had planned to build was gone, but the foundation we were now building for our lives together was much more solid, reinforced by the hard truths we had learned through this ordeal. We were no longer victims of their design. We were architects of our own destiny, carving out a space where honesty was the only currency that truly mattered. The legal process, while slow and often draining, began to yield results that validated our decision to pursue the truth at any cost. We secured a lawyer who understood the nuances of the situation, someone who saw past the family matter, excuses to the cold reality of deliberate financial exploitation. As the investigation into the funds continued, My parents were forced to reckon with the tangible consequences of their actions, a reality they had clearly hoped to avoid by gaslighting me into silence. It was not a joyous victory. It was a necessary one, a formal acknowledgement that their betrayal was a violation that carried weight in the real world. Seeing their once arrogant posture falter under the pressure of legal scrutiny provided a strange sense of closure. I hadn't expected to find they had lived their lives banking on the idea that they were above the rules because they were family, but the law cared nothing for their excuses. This stage of the process was crucial in my own healing, as it forced me to detach my emotions from their reactions and focus solely on the facts at hand. I watched as they attempted to scramble, blaming external factors and trying to paint themselves as the victims of a disgruntled daughter, but the evidence remained stubborn and immovable. It was an essential part of my journey, watching the illusions they had crafted for decades slowly disintegrate, leaving only the truth standing in the light. I felt a sense of pride in our endurance, knowing that we had not faltered when the pressure was at its highest, and that we had successfully protected our future by refusing to let them define our reality any longer. My confidence grew with every passing day, fueling the fire of my resolve to ensure that justice was served and that their era of unearned power was effectively finished. Months have passed since that life-altering confrontation, and the landscape of my life has shifted into something unrecognizable yet profoundly beautiful. We managed to recover a portion of the stolen funds through a legal settlement, but the real gain was the absolute clarity that now defines my existence. I am no longer that exhausted, people-pleasing woman who felt her only value lay in her utility to others. Instead, I see a stranger in the mirror, a woman who is resilient, sharp and fiercely protective of her own peace. Mark and I finally purchased a humble home. Not the extravagant palace we once planned, but a space that is truly ours, paid for by our honest labor and free from the toxic stain of deception. I find such joy in the quiet corners of this new house, knowing that no one can ever hold a financial debt over my head or manipulate my love into a weapon against me. The distance from my family has been a necessary amputation, painful at first but ultimately life-saving. I have discovered that my strength was always there, waiting to be unearthed by the pressure of their betrayal. I have become an advocate for those who feel trapped by the expectations of toxic family members, encouraging them to speak their truth regardless of the consequences. The transformation from a victim of circumstance into the master of my own fate has been the most difficult, rewarding work of my life. My parents still hold on to their secrets and their pride, but they no longer inhabit my headspace, and they have lost the only thing that truly mattered. The trust of a daughter who finally realized her worth was never negotiable. I walk into each day with my head held high, knowing the fire that burned my old world down only cleared the path for a future built on solid ground. As I stand in the doorway of our new home, the golden afternoon sun casting long, peaceful shadows across the floor, I realized that the $120,000 was a small price to pay for the ultimate liberation of my soul. I lost a bank account, but I gained an ironclad sense of self-worth that no amount of money could ever purchase. The tragedy was not the loss of the cash, but the years I spent believing that my love was something to be earned through endless sacrifice and compliance. My parents are mere memories now, ghosts of a past that no longer has the power to haunt me, while I move forward with a heart that is lighter, stronger, and completely mine to protect. This journey of survival has taught me that true justice is not always found in a courtroom, but in the decision to stop letting others dictate your value and to start honoring your own boundaries above their selfish demands. I have walked through the fire of betrayal and emerged on the other side with a clarity that has fundamentally changed my perspective on life. family, and the true meaning of resilience. My story is a testament to the fact that you can reclaim your narrative even when those you trusted most have tried to rewrite it for their own gain. I hope that by sharing this, I can ignite a spark in someone else who is currently trapped in the darkness of an abusive dynamic, showing them that the strength to break free is already within them, waiting to be unleashed. The path of the survivor is often lonely, but it is also the only path that leads to genuine, uncompromised freedom. I am done being the victim, and I am officially starting my new chapter with my head held high, ready to conquer whatever comes next with the unwavering strength I discovered in the wreckage of my old life. If you found the strength in my story to finally set your own boundaries, make sure to like and subscribe to follow my journey as I share more lessons on resilience and self-discovery.